Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singers. Let's get biblical. Q&A. Coming from the Holy Land, Rabbi Tovia Singer. Welcome back.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Good to have you here for sure. Right on. Oh man, it's been a long week. It's good to be back, and it's good to see. I don't know about how things are doing there, but I notice around here they're starting to lift some of the quarantine rigidity that we've had so far. So they're starting to kind of loosen up a little bit.
Yeah, they're doing the same here.
Okay.
We've lost 200 people in Eretz Israel who've died due to this plague, and. But it appears that they're in some control of the situation. To be in control of the United States is much more difficult than in Israel.
Right.
So here today also the restrictions are loosened somewhat. More stores are able to be open. The Shuk, the central market in Jerusalem, was lively today, nothing like it once was, and people are obviously being very, very careful. For those of you who are struggling with this illness, Hashem should watch over you. I wish you a refuah shlema and a refuah shlema for Klal Yisrael, and we should see the redemption quickly in our times. This is a very challenging time that we're going through. And it's a time which is creating tremendous tribulation around the world.
Certainly.
So, yeah, very difficult time.
Very good. Okay, well, we will move on, and let's take this first question. Caller, welcome show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hey, William. This is Holly from Mississippi. I have, for the longest time, wondered about Paul. I have a big issue with him, and he was mainly the reason that I started pulling away from Christianity. A question that I've never had anyone be able to really answer is how in the world did he become an apostle when he did not meet the New Testament criteria for an apostle? And Matthias had already been selected to replace Judas. So that would make him a 13th apostle, since there were 12 to supposedly represent the 12 tribes. So I'm just wondering why anyone even thought he was credible to begin with based on that. Thank you so much. Bye.
That's awesome. Okay, good deal. I couldn't take that. That's a good question.
So as it turns out, Paul was a very important person in the early church. He was, no doubt, the most important convert to Christianity. It would not be difficult to see how Paul would be given this preeminent title as an apostle. An apostle simply means, it's a Greek word, which means someone who is sent on a message. But you're right, in the Gospels, we're told about the 12, and not only told about them, we're actually given a list of who the 12 are. But bear in mind how significant Paul is to the church that emerged, that we can witness to this day. Paul, we are told, authored 13 of the 27 books in the Christian Bible. It is almost unanimously believed that 7 of them really come from the hand of Paul. The other 6, not likely. But whoever wrote it wanted the reader to believe that those letters are written by the hand of Paul. You have another letter that was widely believed to be written by Paul. That's how it made it into the Christian Bible. That's, of course, the book of Hebrews, but it's written anonymously. You have 2 letters in the Christian Bible that are just there to tell you how fantastic Paul was. And that's the epistles of Peter. And they're there to tell you that, Paul was up there. And you have the book of Acts. This is astounding. The book of Acts, which is called the Acts of the Apostles, but it really should be renamed as the Acts of Paul, because it's very much there to advance the idea that Paul was chief among apostles. He was preeminent, and in fact, his ideas were the ones that was superior to others, and everyone fell into place. And therefore, the end of the book of Acts, once Peter leaves the stage in chapter 9, Paul, it's really all about Paul. We have one book in the Christian Bible that was written almost certainly to oppose Paul, and that's the book of James. So Paul looms huge. And the reason why you have so much in the Christian Bible lifting up Paul to that height is because Paul was an enormously controversial figure during the first century. We don't have to guess that. And I'm not saying that because of my personal view of Paul. Paul was regularly, in fact, almost all of his writings are there to show why his view of Christianity, let's call it his Christology, is correct, and the Christology of other early Christians were not correct. His opponents, his interlocutors, at virtually every turn were fellow Christians. Now, just a point about that term Christian, it's possible that the early Christians did not refer to themselves as Christians. We don't know. From the New Testament's use of the term Christian, it would appear that was a term that non-Christians used about Christians, and then later, of course, subsequently, Christians adopted that name. It's possible. That's a very reasonable possibility. There's many examples of all sorts of Christian denominations that adopted the names of those who didn't agree with them. Methodists, as an example, Quakers, and others. So your question really goes to the fact that we have the 12 that are assigned in the Gospels, the 12 apostles, and Judas commits suicide in two different ways, but he's pulled out. Matthias is brought in instead, and that's early on in the book of Acts. And then how did Paul get in there on the team? So as it turns out, the term apostle is used in the Christian Bible and could refer to the 12, and that would be, but it's also the term, which just means somebody who's been sent, does gain a more elastic meaning or a broader meaning to any person who has seen Jesus, has a message directly from Jesus, and therefore in addition to the 12. In fact, although Paul calls himself an apostle frequently, and not just any apostle, but a top apostle, how do you know it's true? He admits it himself. But Paul was, he does refer to the 12 as being separate and unique. And for example, in 1 Corinthians 15. So Paul's reference to himself as an apostle, Galatians 1, 1 Corinthians, it's everywhere. He is referring to himself as having a unique revelation from Jesus. And not only that, he holds himself, in a sense, to be of the highest order of apostle, because what he has is directly from Jesus, according to Paul, and he didn't get it from anyone in Jerusalem. He doesn't need anybody in Jerusalem. He didn't need anyone else. He's superior to them in his revelation. And look, Paul was a very big fan of himself. All right, so that sounds like a biting remark about him, and it is. So Paul, you're familiar with Galatians 1, Philippians 3. Paul is really promoting himself as the person who has the authority. And moreover, he is at the very same time demeaning others who would have that same, who would be called an apostle. For example, he would, in the same context, in Galatians 1 and 2, he would want to point out that Peter was somewhat of a hypocrite. And Paul was not slow to say that to his face. That's right there in Galatians 2. The reason for all this is that Paul was fighting off other Christians in the direction of where Christianity should go and what you should be, because this is a new religion. And when you have a new religion versus relying on the Torah, you're making it up, and so then you need to say, okay, this is the direction you should go in, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of infighting of where this should all go. There were many people who thought that it was necessary to keep the Torah, even if you were a Christian. How does believing in Jesus have anything to do with following the Torah? And moreover, you have in the Sermon on the Mount, we are told that Jesus says that he didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. And in fact, anybody who changes the smallest part of the Torah, a jot or a tittle, a line or a dot, would be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. And unless your righteousness exceeded that of the Pharisees and scribes, you would. So we see that clearly in the Sermon on the Mount. But Paul's theology was entirely different. He believed that if the law has been made a curse for us, he believed that God was done with the Torah keeping the law. You can see how Paul's idea won out, and that you don't have to keep the Shabbos anymore. 2 Corinthians, Paul talks, he's done with the Sabbaths and new moons, and all these commandments are all done with, and circumcision, I mean, the end of that's how Galatians really ends. He mocks people who insist on being circumcised, and he says, why don't you just cut the whole thing off in Galatians 5:12, which is a very, I know you're listening to that and going, really? Well, yeah, that's exactly what he says. I mean, he says, if you're so committed to circumcision, why don't you just essentially castrate yourself? Why don't you just, and you have to believe, you're a Christian, that God actually said that. You have to believe that circumcision, a right given to Avram Avinu, Abraham our father, and to his descendants, in Genesis 17, you have to believe that same God is telling Paul to say, why don't you cut the whole thing off? That's what you have to say. Another thing about Paul, in fullness, is he didn't get along with other people very well. I'm not saying this because I don't regard him in high esteem. He didn't get along with other people. Well, how do I know? Well, it says so in the Christian Bible. How do you trust what it says in the Christian Bible? You're not a Christian. Why don't you believe? Because it's so embarrassing, it's inconceivable that would have been made up. It's inconceivable that Paul's unwillingness to travel with John Mark, he just wouldn't, his conflict with Peter, it's inconceivable that everybody got along just great. And then they just made up that Paul was fighting with these people. That's pretty much the most rigorous criteria you can apply to studying ancient documents and try to tease out what is authentic and what is invented. So Paul refers to himself as an apostle many times in the Christian Bible. He refers to himself as someone who is no less an apostle than he's no less than the apostles, and that in fact his zeal for the law exceeded those of everyone around him. And Paul won. Paul's view was successful. The Greek influence which he injected into this young Christian religion, their worldview about commandments, about the dualism of the body and the soul, that bleeds all over Paul's writings. His view that you didn't actually have to keep these things, but where it brought you to, his dualistic view, all of these ideas that were well ensconced in the Greco-Roman mind was he infused into the church. There were other Christians, as I mentioned, who did not share this view. In fact, detested Paul, despised him. I mean, in a sense, it's understandable why Paul would be such a blistering individual, because he was fighting all of his life. And Paul was working really hard to show that he was right and others was wrong. It's unlikely that what we're told in the book of Acts, that Paul was called down to Jerusalem to answer for the accusation that he opposed the law. It's unlikely that would have been made up. So the answer to your question is that, yes, it's true that there are the 12 that are the apostles. Again, so that word means sent on a mission. We even have an instance in the book of Hebrews where Jesus is referred to as someone who was sent on a mission, who would have been an apostle of God as well. So the word apostle does have some elasticity in the Christian Bible, and Paul insists that he is one, and he is not the least of them. So thank you very much for your question.
Okay, very good. All right. We don't have a caller just yet, so...
Your lines opened up?
Yeah, actually, I had yeah, they're open. They actually... I had to switch computers because of some... I had a lot of complaints that the video feed had been getting chopped up, and there was a delay in the video versus the audio, and so I did some research on it, and I wound up switching all the software from one computer to the other, and there's tons of it, and it's like, so there's certain things that didn't get set right that I've got to work through.
I just want to take a moment to thank you, William, personally, from my heart to yours, for making these mammoth tectonic shifts in your equipment right prior to our show. I'm really glad.
Well, I started last.
I really appreciate that.
I actually started on Tuesday. It was part of what I had to start on Tuesday afternoon, but there was just so much to do. There's still more I've got to get transferred over. But anyway, we are live on we're live on Facebook.
Did somebody call now, or
I'm not logged? I'm trying to get logged into Ring Central because remember I said I had everything switched over, and so the other computer doesn't. It's not recognizing my device. So I'm waiting for a confirmation email, which I probably have. I need to look at now, but I want to try to get you with another question first, if possible. So I can log into Ring Central right now, but you won't be on the same computer, but you won't be able to hear it. So,
on a different computer.
Yeah, it's a completely different computer, and so basically I just swap all the software back and forth. So let me see if I can. Let me just do this real fast. Did you have? I know that I have been sending emails to you with certain questions in line. I don't know. I can look one of those up real fast if you like. Might be quicker for you too, but I'll look to see where I've sent it to you yet. So hang on. Give me just a moment. And okay, let's see.
Right.
Send emails. Okay, here we go. Oh, you know what? Hold on, I got an idea. Give me 1 second. I'm going to log out of this account and go into the Tanakh Talk questions. And let's see where we're at here. Okay, and... Wow, there's a lot of questions there. Sorry, guys, there's a lot of emails I have not even seen here yet. This is good. I'll give us something to go on for the next time. And then I kept hearing, let me see, I got you right here. Okay, very nice. All right, here we go. Let's take this one. Come on, there it goes. Okay. Took me a minute, but here we go. All right, welcome on.
Hey, Rabbi, quick question for you. I'm involved in a lot of debates down in the Atlanta area, a lot of Egyptian debates, a lot of Christian debates versus the thoughts and understandings of the Hebrew culture. In saying that, during one of my debates, an individual brought up the fact that what, Daniel, is or who is Ezekiel speaking of when he says, are you as wise as Daniel? Meaning, since Daniel would have lived at the same time as Ezekiel and would have been young in age, how would he have made himself such a name so early? I'm not sure, but during my debate, it definitely was a curveball that I wasn't ready for. It's not a subject that I had heard on one of your platforms. So just wanted to know about it. Love the show. Keep doing what you're doing. You're the reason why I got out of Christianity in the first place.
That's awesome.
Let's go. Love the show.
Very good. Okay, Rabbi.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool. Nice.
I pray that I should be well and healthy for many, many reasons. I want to see my children and grandchildren grow up, and I want to see the redemption, the coming of Mashiach quickly in our time. And I'm looking forward to the Tchias HaMesim, to the resurrection of the dead, and in particular to meeting Daniel. He's one of the prophets that I'm very much looking forward to greeting him, and please God, it should happen quickly in our time. Daniel was an extraordinary man. So I'm going to answer your question. Whenever you speak about Daniel, I get very excited. I don't think there's a day that goes by there's not a day that goes by that I'm not thinking constantly about Daniel, going through the book of Daniel. He's a remarkable person. No, as it turns out, Daniel had quite a few contemporaries who were famous, lived the exact same time as he did. Maybe perhaps not in the same place, but the person you're referring to, Ezekiel, was a prophet and lived at the exact same time as Daniel. Now, Ezekiel Hanovi, was a little bit older than Daniel, but they lived at the exact same time. Yechezkel spent quite a bit of time in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, before he was whisked away and moved to Bavel, where he continued his work and his preaching. I don't even know where to begin. I got so excited. So how would Daniel be such an important person that Ezekiel would mention him? Because that's how the book of Daniel opens. Daniel was a brilliant young man. He was a prodigy. He was of Davidic lineage. He was one of these extraordinary, brilliant kids. He was only 14 years old when he was brought into the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, and he became essentially a viceroy in Nebuchadnezzar's palace. So just like you see today but that's even more. But you see today in many different governments, in the American government, the highest levels, you have some religious Jews. That was the case in the ancient world. You had it in the Abarbanel in Spain. This was people, there were religious Jews who were throughout history in the center of power, and not because they were seeking power for themselves, but rather they were regarded as the brightest and the best. And in fact, the Babylonians would have Daniel teach them about the sciences, the wisdom, and about times and so on. So Daniel, becoming a very high official in Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Bavel. He was the first of the kings who emerged following the Assyrian Empire. Daniel was snapped up. Daniel was somewhat reluctant, but he certainly would not even eat the food of Nebuchadnezzar. This is all over the place. So Daniel, given that he was put in such an enormous position, means a very high official in the empire. This is not any empire. This is the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire was enormous, controlled the known world. So that's how it'll be very well known. Now, the context of Ezekiel is, you're talking about Ezekiel 28. Daniel is actually mentioned by Ezekiel, just passingly, 3 times, but very famously in Ezekiel 28. Ezekiel 28, the prophet is excoriating the king of Tyre, his name is Hiram. Hiram was quite the personality who had enormous influence in building Eretz Israel, building the land of Israel, building its cities, building the temple. Enormous influence. And he was king. Tyre was a country of enormous wealth, mercantile wealth and transportation and shipping. And ultimately, this kingdom, because of its arrogance, was destroyed. And they're not with us, and they're destroyed thousands of years ago. Now, why was Tyre and Hiram so important to get in not just one chapter, but quite a few chapters in the book of Ezekiel? Ezekiel 26, 27, 28, is in Jeremiah, is in Isaiah. He's all over the place. Why is that very important? Not germane to this, but Hiram had really all the chances in the world, but he was arrogant. He didn't take the cities that were offered to him. He demanded more. And he could have been so great, and he totally blew it. He totally, because of his pride, he went from the highest place to really the lowest place. By the way, everything I'm telling you is explicitly described in the opening of Ezekiel 28. And he says, I say this because Christians think Ezekiel 28 is addressed to Satan, which is completely not true. And it said so. In fact, it says, you're a man and you're not an angel, right at the opening of the chapter. Now, what I've just said poses a monumental problem for the secular academic world. If I tell you this problem of Daniel being a contemporary of Ezekiel poses a problem for the secular world, the minimalist world, the world that seeks to extract and remove any possibility that the Jewish Bible could be the Word of God. That's just the way it is. If you study you could go to Hebrew University. It doesn't make a difference. You go to Princeton University. It doesn't make a difference. That's how they teach. Yale was a divinity school. It still is, but I mean, it has a divinity school, but it was set up by Christians a long time ago. But today, in the secular academic world, it is taught a priori that God had nothing to do with the inspiration of the Bible. Now, they'll never say that. They'll say it this way: based on our historical methods, modern historical methods that we use that are very rigorous, we can prove that. That's what they'll say. It's sort of a disclaimer. And this is just our method of examining ancient literature in the Bible is the same as we use for other ancient literature. That's what they say. They'll make that announcement, but that's not what they really believe. They really believe that God did not inspire these people, and they really teach that, but they're in a lot of trouble. They're in a lot of trouble for the same reason you would get into a lot of trouble if you try to travel to another country using a fake passport, somebody else's passport. You get into a lot of trouble because when you lie, it catches up with you, and you can't keep track of all the lies. If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about. If you're telling the truth, you don't have to remember everything. Mark Twain had a wonderful line, which I don't recall right now, but he talks about you don't have to be really smart to tell when you're telling the truth, because you don't have to keep track of all your lies. So the academic, why is the academic world so like this? Because Christians went to war from 1618 to 1648, the bloodiest religious war in human history. And the Enlightenment emerged, where it was the bent changed dramatically, an enormous influence of the psyche of Europe, Germany, which was decimated, and so on. So the Enlightenment emerged, and from that there was a very definite, peculiar bent against anything religious. So you can almost put history on a psychiatrist couch and analyze it. It isn't difficult. So the point is that there are prophecies in the book of Daniel that make it transparent that Daniel is an inspired book, is the Word of God. That only God could have known what Daniel reveals, or an angel, let's say Gabriel, reveals in the book of Daniel. And the academic world, if you think Christians could be fundamental, believe me, you can have a more open conversation with fundamentalists in many religions. I'm a fundamentalist Jew, that's fine. Then in the academic world, will blow a gasket on this one. Really, 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 you're not getting your degree if you reveal that Daniel lived during Babylon exile. They go crazy over that. And usually, in 99% of the books out there, they'll simply write, and we know that Daniel didn't really write Daniel. Daniel didn't live during Babylon exile, but rather he lived essentially during the time of right before the Maccabees, meaning he lived after Alexander the Great, meaning during the Greek Empire. And the reason why they have to do this is their hands are tied. Because Daniel has in it contains history, and it's in contrast to other types of history, he's writing about histories that haven't yet occurred yet, like the Greek Empire, like about Alexander the Great. He's in there, not by name, but he's in there. Just take my word for it. And Alexander the Great's early death. He died, he was in his young 30s. What was he, 32, 33 years old? And the empire, the Greek Empire, was then divided into 4 parts. It's there, really there. And the Roman Empire, it's there. So, if Daniel was written during the Babylonian exile, then you have to immediately become a religious person. You have to believe in God. There's no way Daniel. But the problem, how do the secular world resolve this? So they say that Daniel really didn't live then. The whole thing essentially is a pseudepigrapha, and it really was written by a later author, and the whole story of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar is not true. Well, you know what happens? I remember the Nixon presidency. I remember Watergate. And I remember my mother saying this to me. It was like, I didn't know, it was in the early 70s, so it was the big thing, as you can imagine. Like a president just goes, I resign, and cries like a baby on television and flies away on a helicopter. I mean, believe me, that was a very, that never happened before, and that was very strange. So at the time, I remember my mom says that if you lie, if you cover up, you're ultimately gonna get caught. And it was in fact the cover up that did it Nixon. And I went, okay, Mom, that was a very good message. So what happens here is that when you cover up the divine origins of the book of Daniel, you get into a lot of trouble because you're covering it up. Now, as a professor, you're not going to get into trouble with your students because your students know nothing about the book of Daniel. Believe me, they just don't know. It's shocking to me that so many people in America, that's where I grew up, I don't know what, something like 80% of Americans are Christians, 86% believe in God. I don't know what the number is exactly. 75, 80% of Americans identify as a Christian. So I'm like, very, very few have ever read the book of Daniel. Very, very few. And therefore, as students, they might have come from a very religious home, and they wouldn't even know how to respond to this. One of the many problems that the secular world has to confront, and they don't. with very, very rare exceptions, don't, is that we have what historians cherish with regard to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is better attested to than so many of the books in the Jewish Bible. Because if you have literature from the ancient world, and for now, take my word for it, there's very little surviving literature from the ancient world. Almost everything is gone. There's a little bit. And what we have is engraving. There's very, very little bit that survived. I mean, think about it. What if you wrote anything down? What was the chances that it would actually survive given the humidity, sunlight? It would just be gone. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls because it was in the Dead Sea area, which is a place where there's in caves, so there was no light, there was no moisture, and therefore they were able to survive. So what historians would really like to affirm that someone really lived then and was really important is we would like to have an eyewitness account. We would even like to have a kind of disinterested eyewitness account. You know, you have someone who mentions the person, but that's not the point of it. The person's not going, and there really is a person named Daniel. It's just, Daniel was such a well-known figure. He was such an Einstein of his day. He was such a genius of his day that his name became synonymous with brilliance and intelligence and wisdom. In the same way today, people say, you think you're an Einstein. It's exactly the same way. So in our culture, in conventional culture, that Einstein has become a historical figure, 20th century figure, whose name just becomes interchangeable with genius. It's also not uncommon for people who are great geniuses to achieve their most brilliant discoveries in their youth. People very frequently do their premium great work in fairly young years and very frequently are unable to replicate that sort of creativity later on. You see you say the same thing in many other fields in music where people in their youth wrote gorgeous music, and then when they got a lot older, they were never able to produce those kinds of hits. There's a creativity. So Daniel was very, very young as a prophet. There were other such prophets like this. Jeremiah was only 15 years old when he became a prophet. In fact, Jeremiah's argument against God, not an argument, but he was saying, I'm really not worthy of this and I shouldn't, I'm not a suitable candidate to be a prophet, is because I'm so young. And God reassured him. So you had these sort of men. There were others. But the problem is that everyone in the academic world knows, I mean, not everyone, people who are in this field know that Ezekiel really did live during the Babylonian exile. So we have an eyewitness account to Daniel, and in fact, not only a Daniel, but the Daniel, and that he was very brilliant. And the remark is not it's not an apologetic, it's just passingly. You think you're as wise, Daniel? And that's said in that instance to Hiram, the king of Tyre. There are other things that if you read the book of Daniel, you would know immediately it had to be inspired by God, because the book of Daniel has a prophecy articulated by the prophet Gabriel of the destruction of the second temple. It's not what they teach at all the universities. I mean, all the Bible classes in universities. It's not discussing the temple being defiled. They do mention that as well, but they actually talk about the absolute destruction of the sanctuary at the end of chapter 9 of Daniel. Well, how would Daniel know about what happened in 70? And believe me, just look it up for yourself. Just look up Daniel 9, verse 26 and 27. And one other thing. Your professor, these are not leading, lying, cheating people. This is how they're taught. This is how they're taught when they're getting their PhDs in some sort of New Testament, Old Testament, whatever they call it. This is how it's written by all the scholars of that sect. It's real, and really, this is fringe in Bible scholarship, because the vast majority of scholars of Tanakh are Jews who study in very serious advanced levels in the Mir and so on. So you'll tell the vast majority of scholars, they're not it's scholars who peddle in this idea. And I know a lot of guys who went to Hebrew University, and believe me, Hebrew University, despite its name, is no better than any of the others, who was made clear to them, if they ever touch this subject, they, on their thesis, or if they attempted to show that Daniel was written during the time of Daniel, they would never get a job. That's how it is. There's many other ways to see it. Daniel's bewildered because of very serious problems that would not be a problem to someone writing the book later. Daniel's bewildered why the Babylonian Empire collapsed and the Persian Empire emerged, and the Jews are not returning back to Eretz Yisrael, not fulfilling Jeremiah 29 verse 10. Now, why would someone writing it hundreds of years after the Babylonian exile be worried? Now, I'm telling you this, and if you've studied well, if you've read my books or whatever, so you know this stuff. But if you haven't, you're going, really? Really? If Daniel really lived during the Greek Empire and was a living witness to Alexander the Great, and then made up that he's Daniel, means pseudepigrapha, why is he concerned about the Jews not returning? They returned a long time ago. People don't know. And the secular academic world is really very secular. And there are certain things that are just not acceptable to them, such as that Isaiah was written by one author, Isaiah, who lived during the Assyrian Empire. Well, how did Isaiah know about Cyrus? So there's your answer to the question. Daniel is lived during the Babylonian exile, and the book of Daniel is much better attested to than other books in Tanakh. Other books, I wouldn't have other books possible. I would not have other attestations, because it is unusual for one prophet in Tanakh to quote another prophet, unless it's Moses. It happens, there. And in fact, if I was going to do a test and say, name 3 times in the prophets where a prophet mentions another prophet, you would have to really know your stuff to know where those are. They're there, but you'd have to know. You really have to know yourself, because they're not interested in that. The prophets are there to make you a better person, to show you what can go wrong in life. And tell you about great people does not tell you how to be a great person. So the prophets are usually very, very critical. The prophets section of Tanakh is filled with criticism. It's loaded with that. Because in essence, it's there to show you, to bring to light what you can do wrong, how you can completely misunderstand the Torah. So Ezekiel is an eyewitness to Daniel. We don't have that with others. And as it turns out, the book that in the academic world they attack as a forgery more than any other book is the book of Daniel. So it bothers them. They don't attack other books so much. Why? Because it doesn't threaten their worldview. So thank you for that question. You've got your answer, and embrace Daniel. It's really beautiful. Such a gorgeous book. Thank you so much for your question.
All right, very good. I've got logged in to Ring Central now. I'm just not sure if it's going to come through yet. Caller, can you hear me okay?
Okay, by a show of hands.
So, all right, yeah, I'm not really sure. It's definitely not connecting well. So,
in a moment, for all those of you who are very excited to be here.
So, I'm gonna have to go the back doorway, if you want to call it.
I'll just add this one point. As it turns out, people who teach in the academic world,
right?
Most of them will not admit this, but some will. Some will concede that the reason why we can't accept Daniel as written during Babylonian exile or the second half of the book of Isaiah, written by the prophet Isaiah, is because we don't believe in miracles. There's a point I should raise here. So the academic world advances the idea that they simply don't have the tools of history, the study of history, to be able to draw that conclusion that it's divine. And this, in a way, could be helpful to Christians as well, because Christians become very defensive about this. They don't have the tools. Well, I know you don't have tools, but if you don't have tools, just get out of the way. It's like someone standing there with a thermometer, and a person standing with a thermometer. And let's say you have a thermometer and this, right? This measures the oxygen in your blood and your heartbeat, okay? Whatever this is called. Let's say I have that, okay? And then I have a thermometer. So I say, well, I can't measure microwaves, so therefore it doesn't exist. No, you just don't have the tools for it. The text is claiming to be the Word of God, to be a holy book. It's not like for the New York Times. The New York Times is not claiming to be the Word of God. Cicero, a brilliant writer and orator, he doesn't claim that the Republic was divinely inspired, so you can use those rigorous methods for Libby and for ancient writers. But when a book is claiming to be a holy book, you've got to get another tool out. And if you don't have it, just admit you don't have that tool. That's fine, but don't make claims that you can know it's not a holy book, because you're a dentist and you do root canals, but you're not qualified to deliver babies. And I wouldn't want a root canal specialist to deliver my children or grandchildren. So you're just not equipped for it. You don't have the tools for it. Let's be clear about that. All right. Do we have you there, William?
I'm still here. I've got it downloaded. I'm just trying to find out. They apparently have done an update as well, and I'm not familiar with what they're doing here. So I'm going to see why they're not routing the phones in through my system. It's coming through the monitor itself, and I've kind of weaned through that. So, still working with it though.
All right, I'm going to do something I've never done.
Okay.
That is, I'm going to open up. I never did this ever. I'm going to open up YouTube.
Oh, look at the chat. Good
Because I
idea.
think this is broadcasting. I've never done this, and William and I have been on for a long time together.
We're not actually live, Rabbi.
And I'm going to go in.
Rabbi, we're not live on YouTube. If you're going to look for questions,
So I can see if I can come on live.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
On this show. There's a way to do this.
Rabbi, can you hear me? Hello? Rabbi, you can't hear me now?
But I don't know where my show is.
Hello, hello? Hello? Rabbi? That's really weird. Hello? I don't know if his headphones came unplugged or what, but Rabbi, can you hear me? Hang on, let me see. Why can't you hear me?
Let's see if I could.
Rabbi, can you hear me okay?
Once went into his.
Hello?
Let's see how I can go into the show live.
I have no idea why you can't hear me right now.
I've never gone on my own show.
Okay.
As you can imagine.
I'm gonna hang up. I'm gonna hang up with Rabbi and call him back because he cannot hear a single word I'm saying. Why can't he hear me? That's weird. Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
I've been talking to you for like several minutes, but you haven't been able to hear me for some reason.
Can't imagine why.
I can't either. I was like
redo your entire computer system.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to assume that was on my end. I don't know how though, because I could hear you, and both of us were coming through the meter just fine.
I was going to actually go. I don't know how to, and you don't need to tell me how to.
Yeah, actually, go to Facebook. That's where your questions are going to be because I'm not on YouTube either. It's actually it's only on Facebook Live right now.
So if I go to Tanakh Talk,
Yeah,
do I need to? Do you have a question?
You know what? Hold on. Just go on Facebook, and I'll tag you on.
I'm on there.
I'll tag you where the video is live at. Okay.
That you're going to.
I have a lot of callers calling in, but I can't route them to my board for some reason, and it's not. I've got everything plugged in. It's not a loose wire. It's just the new desktop app has got its own routing.
I should go to my picture, to my.
Hang on, I'll tell you.
Page. I don't see anything tagged.
Let's see. Let's go here. I'm just going to tag you and just follow the tag, okay?
All right.
All right, hang on a second. Tovia. Okay, and now as soon as you get a little red bubble pop up, just go there. And you can scroll in those questions. Did you get the tag? If not, I'll look for one here.
So a tag means.
That means I just typed up your name and it flags you. It'll send you like a little alert, like a little red balloon should pop up. Notification. There you go.
Likes the link tagged in.
And it should say William Hall tagged you in a comment or something like that. Just click on that.
Could you send me that link as a message in Messenger?
I don't know. I can't do that because it's like it doesn't give me a link. It just says the link says my Facebook page. Actually, yeah, here we go. I can do that here. Just
wait, let's see here.
Did you find it?
This might be it. Might be it. Praise the Lord.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. All right, I'm in it.
Okay, good. Okay, so yeah. All right.
There's actually a. So where are the comments?
They're underneath the video. They should be. Well, yeah, all the comments are underneath there. Let's see. All right. God, these things are like filtering. I've been getting tons of calls in, but I can't get them routed in here for some reason. So, you know what you could do, Rabbi? You could log on to My Ring Central from your side, and I don't know if I could actually hear it though. I don't think you can route it to your board, can you?
Give me just a second here. So
Okay.
there are comments.
Okay. And while you're doing that,
I see here. I see it now.
Okay.
All right. Let me scroll down.
Okay. Good. That'll buy me some time.
And let me just look here for.
I can hear some. Caller, can you hear me? Hold on. Oh, that was you. That was on your side.
Yeah.
Wait, caller, you can't hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm not.
can you hear me?
Rabbi, can you hear also?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it looks like
Hello?
it looks like it is working. Okay, great. It didn't seem like it was working earlier, but it sounds like I've got you. Looks like we can both hear you. Go ahead with your question.
Yay! Okay, well, this is Holly again.
Hi, Holly.
I've gotten in twice, like in 2 weekends. I'm super excited. So my question kind of goes back to what you were first talking to about Paul, but my question is specifically on James, and I find his letter interesting. It's super short. You know, he talks a lot about good works. And I know there's another place in the New Testament where Paul comes back to Jerusalem, and James insists that, you know, Paul does this ritual washing kind of to prove himself. So my question is kind of twofold. One, there's such a discrepancy on who James was. You know, the Catholics and the Orthodox Christians, you know, believe that there was no way that Mary was a virgin her entire life. So James had to have been like a stepbrother or maybe even a cousin of Jesus. And then you have a Protestant belief that, you know, that Joseph and Mary had children after Jesus. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about James and also his tie and how he ministered to the Jewish community in Jerusalem and his major differences from Paul.
Are you good with that, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Okay, Holly, thank you for calling in.
Holly.
Thank you. You guys have a great week.
You too. Thank you
You
so
too. Have a
much.
good week. Stay safe, dear. Holly is really smart. She's asking really, really good questions. That's still wow. Thank you. No one's ever asked those questions before. So first of all, how does the church solve the issue of what Jesus is said in the Christian Bible to have brothers and sisters, and not just James? And well, who were they, and how did they become his brothers and sisters? Now, this becomes an unpleasant question for let's just say the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, that Mary not just was a virgin when she conceived with Jesus, but in what's called perpetual virginity, which means that she remained a virgin. She never. What do I mean that means? You know what that means. So who are these children? Who are these brothers and sisters of Jesus? So there was a number of solutions that the church came to. The one that is most popular is that Joseph was a widower from a prior marriage. He had these children. So therefore, when the New Testament talks about the brothers and sisters of Jesus, they are really half brothers and sisters because they're the children of Joseph and not of Mary, which would mean that would not be biologically connected to Jesus anyway. You see me smiling, and the reason is because this is very, this is obviously very, very torturous. And it's important to the church to present Mary as always being a virgin because the church extolled virginity as the highest standard. And there's an ancient book that didn't make it into the Christian Bible, but it's the book of James. It's the proto-gospel of James, which is really about Mary and her mother Anna and Mary's miraculous birth. It's someone that way up there is not having sex with anybody. I don't know how else to say that. So that's the most popular solution used to explain how did Jesus have siblings in the Christian Bible. Protestants do not believe that Mary remained a virgin. Most Protestants don't. And, of course, Paul expresses explicitly that, virginity is a high standard, that not only was he a virgin, he was celibate, but that he encourages others who can to emulate that. This is so dualistic, this is so Greek. So Greek. This is so Pythagoras. That's what Paul's doing. I know I'm going off on a tangent. He's fusing together Greek ideas with just a Jewish thumbnail sketch, but it's really all these are Greek ideas. Now the question is, well, what did James hold? What power, authority did he have? Well, James, we are told, was the leader of the Jerusalem church, a person of enormous influence there, but his view would have been that the Jews have to observe the Torah, the law. It's interesting that James is frequently, his importance is weakened in the Christian Bible. Very often, writers don't even mention him by name, try to avoid it. It's even very interesting that he's even called James. It means, where does the name James come from? And you're going, what do you mean? Well, as it turns out, his name was Jacob. So you go, well, it must be from the Greek. And it isn't. Because if you go to the Greek New Testament, he is called Jacob in the Greek New Testament. I mean, the translators wanted to strip anything Jewish from his name, so the translators did this, not the original Greek text. The original Greek text referred to him with the same name that they referred to Lahavdil, Jacob, the patriarch. In the Greek, it's the same name. So the name James is there as a device to strip the Jewishness of James. And the book of James was widely regarded was not held in high esteem by Luther, who called it a straw of a gospel. So what James what the book of James seems to be doing is to arguing against Paul. Whereas you have all these letters of Paul, and you have letters that support Paul, like the epistles of Peter. And those are written to support Paul. The book of Acts is there to support Paul. The one voice that made it through the canon is the book of James, which is clearly stating that you need, along with your faith, you need to live by a certain standard. And if you don't live by that standard, then your faith is nothing. And that text, because it was said to have been authored by the brother of Jesus, I don't believe that, but it's a voice from the earlier church that would have been embraced by groups like the Nazarenes, like the Ebionites, early groups that believe that you had to keep the Torah. These are the opponents of Paul. So that's what James is. James is the head of the Jerusalem church, and James is the person who advocates for Torah observance among Christians, especially people who are Jewish. Believing in Jesus, what does that have to do with not keeping Shabbos? Well, how is one related to another? Now, and that's precisely what Paul is pushing hard. And Paul is pushing so hard against this that even the agreement that was forged in Jerusalem with Peter, Paul, we are told, and James, the leaders of the church, were all there, and they resolved that non-Jews who became Christians could not eat from the meat that was offered to idols in a sacrificial system. Paul just said, "Oh, you can. If you don't believe in it, why can't you?" And he doesn't say it in Acts, because that would be, he says it on his own, 1 Corinthians 8. So James is weakened. He's weakened by Luke. He's weakened by the book of Acts. And his book is not well embraced by the church, although it's canon. And Christians will simply say that, well, you need works to be evident of your faith. So that's what works in. But it is strange that the book that James would be even called James, because it's not, why do you need to do that? The source for that alteration, because James doesn't sound Jewish and Jacob sounds very Jewish, is in the translations, not from the original Greek text.
Interesting. Very good. Okay, we'll go and move on to the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. You're live on the air.
Oh, yes, this is Danny from Dallas.
Hi, Danny. Welcome.
Thank you. Rabbi Singer, I hope you're well, your family, in this time. Just had a quick question. I was reading in Sanhedrin 97, and I believe in the Zohar, too. It talks about how the time of Mashiach's coming will be very few Talmudei Chachamim. And I was wondering how that lines up with sort of the need for the Jewish people, potentially the world, to do teshuvah, or that in order for our merit to bring the Mashiach, we need to collectively do teshuvah. So I was wondering if that is a sine qua non, that there will be very few Torah scholars at that time, or just the overall thought process there. Thank you so much.
Very good. Okay, Danny, thank you for your call. We'll go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for your answer. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, bye. All right,
Thank you. So this appears in a fascinating chapter of Tractate Sanhedrin. It's the last chapter. It's called Perek Chelek. And that area of the Talmud is describing events that will happen prior to the Messianic age, and then the next steps that will launch the Messianic age. the picture that is displayed is that there'll be such a vacuum of Torah scholars prior to the period of the Messianic age. I want to just find the right words to explain this. So I'm not sure of this, but I feel that we are now living in a Messianic period, which means that the events leading up to the coming Mashiach are now unfolding. I didn't hear any voices and I didn't have any visions, but it is very clear to me that all the events that are unfolding now are are, are expressed explicitly, not implicitly, but explicitly in Tanakh. And now it's unfolding in a Seder, in an order of events to awaken people that they would repent, that they would do tshuva, they would return back to the God of Israel, and not just among the Jews, but among the world. Now, when Mashiach is coming, that means if we're in this era right now, and now we are living in a time where there is more study of Torah and a return to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. There's more Jewish literacy than perhaps any time since the days of Hezekiah, that we are bouncing back from a very bad time, meaning 100 years ago, where there was a dearth of literacy. And the way you can see or view when do the manifests of the signs that Mashiach is quickly coming, when do you look at, how do you look at that? Well, it's clear that the children of Israel return to the land of Israel, and the earth, the land, gives forth its fruit. In fact, the Talmud in the same area identifies that as the most important feature sign that, in fact, the coming of Mashiach is absolutely imminent. So if this period is the period of we're already in the Messianic age, meaning we're in a series of steps that are leading to Mashiach, but it's already been triggered, it's been launched. And the reason why it's taking so long, why there are steps, that's why Passover Seder is called a Seder of order, is that people would repent. It's very important that Mashiach doesn't come instantaneously. Because if he would just come out of nowhere, if he would just came in the early 20th century, people wouldn't know what to do with that. And number two is the world wouldn't be ready because the Jews have to be in Eretz Yisrael. So the time prior to the Jews' return to the land of Israel was a time when, in fact, there were many problems in Jewish communities worldwide. And that's what, if my assessment is correct, I can't tell you I know, but just from what I see, I can't imagine that we're not. It is true that I want it to be true, so I need to be suspect of these views, but there's not only a consensus, it's just so manifestly clear for so many reasons that we're in it. So we are now in the Messianic age. We're in that epoch now. And therefore, the period prior to that epoch is the one which there'll be such a void of Torah scholars among Klal Yisrael prior to the return of Jews in mass to Eretz Yisrael in the 19th century. So then there was a nightmare. It was a nightmare in terms of knowledge and literacy and so on. So that's what the Talmud is referring to there. But it's not referring to now, because now the Jewish learning and study is more widespread than any time since the First Temple. Not only that message is getting through to the non-Jewish world, because not hundreds, not thousands, but probably millions of people are turning around now and grabbing the shirt of a Jew. It's happening now, right now. People are calling them Noachites. It's really not a great term, but we have to use it for the time being. These are people who are embracing Judaism as their faith. That never happened in history. There were always non-Jews who embraced Judaism, but there are very few of them. Very rare. Today it's in such huge numbers, and it really shouldn't be. This should be the last time in history that anyone want to have anything to do with us. Why? Because we should be radioactive. Here's a, whoa, a Jew, let's get out of here. Because the worst catastrophe in Jewish history, which I am sure is Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, verse 7, has occurred 7 decades ago. The worst thing in history. So, umimeno yivoshea, but from it, you will be saved. That's where your salvation will emerge from. From the darkest moment of despair, you will be saved. You got that? So that's a theme. From the darkest moment where hope seems to be impossible, you need to figure out that God is really there. In the darkness of the winter, the light was shown for us in Hanukkah. And our job is to recognize that God showed that light at the darkest moment and light our Hanukkah candle to say, okay, we see you. And that was the darkest moment in Jewish history. Umi, and look at the language so you can see how this works. It's so, look, Tanakh is really, really quite elegant. It, like if you're looking to fall in love in your life, I'm not sure, but if you are, get into Tanakh. You'll just swoon. So therefore, when the Talmud is discussing what will be like prior to that period, it's describing the events that occurred, in fact, prior to that period. And things got so bad that there was only one way to go, and then snap. Following the return of Jews in mass to Eretz Yisrael, and Yerushalayim restored back to the hands of the Jewish people, therefore we would expect to see that knowledge becomes widespread around the world, which also we see that in Daniel 12. So it's referring to prior, means prior to the epoch of the Messianic age, in which we are already in it. How come I'm sitting at a Passover Seder and all I've done is had a little wine and had a piece of potato and it smells really good? You know, like at a Passover Seder, you know, people are usually hungry because the Seder, you can't conduct the Seder until nightfall. So, you know, and there's like really great food at the Passover Seder. I mean, really good stuff. And you're sitting there and going, it smells so good, but all I got was this potato. People, when they eat that potato dipped in salt water, people usually go like, that's the best potato ever. That's my favorite potato. What I'm not trying to be cute, but imagine the person who goes, look, what's going on with this meal? It smells good, but all I had is just a little bit of wine, and then a potato and salt water, and then we're talking on and on and on, yakety, yakety, yak. And then you finally, you know, you eat matzah, and it's like not really much. It's a cracker, and then bitter herbs. I'm out of here. I'll find somewhere where they're serving food, the full dinner right away. And imagine leaving, and you left the worst possible time. And that's what happened in Jewish history. People said, I'm out of here. Imagine, you know, how many Jews came to America between 1880 and 1924? About 4 million. And you know what so many of them did? They threw the tefillin overboard. And they didn't even see a Holocaust yet. They threw the Talmud, they threw the Jewish books overboard. They were done with Judaism, finished. Over. You know how often that happened? Oh, foolish people. They didn't see what's coming yet. They left the Seder too early because they weren't impressed with the potato. They didn't like the salt water. Foolish people. You should have stuck around. The dinner is coming. The Passover lamb is coming at the end of all this. The great meal is coming. The days of Mashiach are coming. But you left. And not only did you leave, but you didn't hang out outside either. You ran over to the opposition. You became an an enemy of God by denying his existence and became a communist or an atheist, or you converted chas v'chalila to another religion that opposes Judaism. Could you imagine? I mean, this is so tragic that I'm smiling because I don't want to do the other one. Could you imagine you're at a Seder and you just scram because you just all I had is a potato and salt water, just a vegetable and salt water, where's the food? There's no, and then bitter herbs. It tastes terrible. I'm out of here, and I'm joining the opposition. You're full. It's just right around the corner. You got off at the worst possible time, and that's what the earlier generations were. They just got off, and they abandoned Torah. As we see, I don't want to name names because I'm not just being negative. But you don't have to be a genius to figure this out. And as a result of that, wow, it was very bad. Now we're seeing, in fact, since 1967 specifically, we're seeing a tremendous repentance, not only among the Jews, but worldwide, which did not exist on this scale any time in history. There was, you'd have to go back to the first century. There was quite an amount of conversion to Judaism at that time. The days of Ezra, there was quite a bit of converting to Judaism at that time, for sure. We know that explicitly. I have to go back a long, long time. So there's your answer. That's why there's a dearth of information before the unfolding. People just leave the Seder Torah, don't leave. And for those of you who joined the Seder, welcome. All right, William.
Okay, very good. We'll move on to the next caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Steve from Brooklyn. Hope all are safe and well.
Hey.
I want to make sure you hear me clearly.
Yes, thank you. I can hear you just fine. Hey, I have a question for you first. Do me a favor. When you were on hold just now, when you called in, did you hear anything at all, or did it just go straight silence?
I went to silence, and before I went to silence, I heard you schmoozing in the background, and then silence, and then the phone hung up. Then I panicked. I had connections. I had to call back. And they 300 years to get back on. I'm like, darn, I want to get on.
Oh, boy. That's funny.
I felt like I just lost a lotto ticket.
I got you. Okay, cool, man. I just appreciate the feedback, bro. We'll go ahead with your question.
No problem. Okay. So Rabbi Singer mentions this term many times, and he says it's not germane to the topic, but I wanted to please be germane this time around. You mentioned premillennial dispensation. So I want, if you could just explain what that is quickly, and also, was it a knee-jerk response to the guilt that the church felt for treating Jews like garbage for so many thousands of years? And was this an early Jews for J kind of missionary tool to kind of get everybody into it? Was is this like the underground, the back end of the Jews for J movement, or the progenitor of it? That's my question. Is it clear?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Okay, thank you, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Looking forward.
You bet. All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right, Rabbi, go ahead.
So I've often mentioned premillennial dispensationalism. And the point of when I discuss it, almost invariably, is a belief that they hold that's not directly related to the name, to premillennial dispensation. And I say what they believe, what those words mean, is not germane to the topic. Just to explain quickly, so the topic invariably is the fact that there are Christians who believe that the covenant that God made with the physical Jewish people has never been abrogated, has never been nullified, and the church has not replaced Israel. In fact, God, they hold, has a two-track plan. One with the church, with whom God, they believe, has a covenant, and one with the physical nation of Israel, which is connected to the land of Israel. And they believe that the teaching that was widespread in the church, namely that the church has replaced Israel and is the new Israel, which is called replacement theology, covenant theology, was the biggest mistake ever, the biggest mistake. And that God has never stopped working with the Jewish people, and that covenant can never be abrogated. The person who really spread that message, that idea, was a man named John Nelson Darby. He was born exactly in the year 1800. And so he was a British preacher, theologian, and he came to the United States and famously spread that message. And in the United States, it spread like wildfire. Not because they wanted to convert Jews, because in the 19th century, how many Jews were there in the United States? Not that many. In the year 1880, there were only 280,000 Jews in the United States. In the mid-19th century, wasn't that many. It really was the belief that God is working through the Jewish people. They are preserved and will return to the land of Israel. And this is in direct opposition to the teachings of the church, very famously in Augustine's City of God, where Augustine has the exact opposite view of the Jews. God kept the Jews around, but to be an example, a witness people of what happens to a people that reject Christ, and worse than rejecting him. The City of God is not a screed that says some really uncomplimentary things about the Jewish people. So, John Nelson Darby's view is not based on let's now convert all the Jews of the United States. His view was received very well in America because American Christians in the 19th century, I mean, shortly after the birth of the United States, were very disposed to viewing any iteration of Christianity that had its birth in Europe or Britain to be wrong. Early American Christians, let's say 19th century American Christians, really didn't like the Christianity that emerged from England, didn't like at all the Roman Catholic Church, and this is a hallmark belief of the Roman Catholic Church. So Americans were very anti-European Christianity. This is not rocket science, and therefore if the Europeans hated the Jews and hated anything Jewish and hated Hebrew, we like Hebrew and we're going to learn Hebrew, and we might even consider making Hebrew to be an official language of the United States. It didn't make it, but look at Yale University's logo. So the spread of studying Hebrew in the United States became very in thing, and there were lawmakers like a lawmaker from Kansas. His name is Cyrus Schofield, who wrote a Schofield Bible. It's a commentary on the Bible, and putting this inside the commentary, it spread like wildfire. Many, many others. Okay, so now that I've explained it, so they believe that the covenant God made with the Jewish people has never been abrogated. In fact, the Jews have to return to the land. God loves the Jews. It doesn't mean that Jews could be saved as a result of this. Not at all. These people believed very much that you have to convert the Jews to Christianity. Don't ask me the obvious question, but they do. And they were, in the United States, they were right at the forefront of converting Jews, as they are today. Virtually all the missionaries that are really out there seeking to convert Jews to Christianity, to become a Messianic, whatever they call it. So they virtually all come out of this genre of thinking. Another point is John Nelson Darby was not the first person to think about these ideas. These ideas were expressed centuries earlier by a few others. So he strengthened it, coalesced the idea, and moved it, and was able to sell it very well. And he sold it in exactly the right place. Not England, but the United States. And the United States was predisposed to favoring the Jews for a lot of reasons, but because they didn't like England, they didn't like Europe, they didn't like anything to do with the Catholic. They really didn't like the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, Roman Catholics who immigrated to the United States, Irishmen, Italians, they didn't do really well in the United States. I mean, they weren't very quickly accepted. In fact, it wasn't like they were, lynched, but it was not a picnic for them either. So anything not British, everything not European was something to be looked at favorably. So that addresses that question. And it was an idea that was already ruminating. He didn't invent it out of nowhere. And of course, Nelson, Darby had a huge uh, s- uh, he had a huge sources to get this, to derive this from. I mean, it was very easy for him to show that the covenant God made with the Jewish people is eternal because it's everywhere, and that God would never destroy the Jewish people. It's everywhere. It's an eternal covenant forever. So it was very easy for him to teach this. It was, everything worked out right. It was right timing, and he was in fact correct on this point. Now, what does dispensationalist mean? So dispensationalist means something that is related to it. Dispensationalist means an economy. That's what a dispensation is. Now, it doesn't mean economy in the way we would typically use that, but like a monetary economy, but rather it's an economy of a epoch in history in how did God interact with mankind, and more specifically, how did man achieve salvation during these different periods of time. And the point was that it was different. In a different period of time, God provided salvation for in a different climate, under different circumstances. And there's a disagreement among dispensationalists over how many epochs were there, how many spiritual economies existed. 7, were there 9? This they fight about, but that's not germane to what you're asking. So the dispensation means, how is God providing salvation to mankind at different periods in time? And as you can understand, following the birth of Christianity, that would be an epoch that salvation is gained only by believing in Jesus. They were complete hardcore Christians, but they were hardcore anti-Roman Catholic, very much so, and you can see that, and very much the Church of England, which utterly believed in replacement theology. Now, there's a strange thing that also emerged. I don't think I ever talked about this, and that is, back in England, this caught fire. This caught fire all over Europe, but in England there were Anglicans that began to believe that God is working with the Jewish people, and God's covenant with the Jewish people cannot be abrogated, and the Jewish people belong in the land of Israel. And there were some Anglicans who believed, in fact, there was only one covenant that God had, and that was with the Jews, and not even with the church. And they would ask you, like, where does the church have a covenant with God? They have salvation through Christianity. Where's your covenant? So there are some Anglicans who would be conservative, evangelical Anglicans. So the Anglican Church is a Protestant whose rituals are closest to the Roman Catholic Church, but they of course utterly reject the Pope's authority. They see themselves sort of a midway between Catholicism and Protestantism, but they're Protestants. So the dispensationalism sees different periods in history in how man achieves salvation, and they have to, because you have to wonder, like, what happened before Jesus? Like, how did people get salvation then? What did people do during, before the flood, after the flood, and so on and so forth? And of course, it goes to the Noahide law. So there's some truth in it, that there were, prior to the giving of Torah, there were only 7 Noahide laws, and so on and so forth. So, and the premillennial versus amillennial, so that just it's Christian, it's an effort on the part of Christians to determine how exactly Jesus' supposed second coming would unfold, in what order would things occur, uh, uh, and what would it look like. So this goes to the issue of tribulation. So the issue of premillennial is eschatological, and the issue of dispensationalists is an issue of salvation and the economies that God used to enable man to have salvation, and in what period in history did man use a certain method to gain favor with God. Okay, so there's your answer, Steve. Thank you for your question.
Very good. All right, we're going to move on to the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. You're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hey, this is Holly from Mississippi.
Hi, Holly. You hitting the jackpot.
Hey, I finally got through.
All right, good. How are you? Welcome.
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi there, Shalom.
I have a question, several, but the main one that I have is, where did the idea come from that humans could no longer go straight to God, that humanity was just divorced from him, and now we needed a mediator or a PR guy, if you will, to go through? I'm leaving Christianity, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around how to have a relationship directly with God. I mean, I've always prayed to him, but I just feel like there's just a gap there. You know, I'm only 40, but I was a Christian for 32 years. So, I'm just wondering where the idea came from. I've never seen in Scripture where there was a dividing line where it was like God just washed his hands of humanity. So I'm just curious as to where that started.
I want to, Holly, let me keep you on the phone for a moment, okay?
Okay.
Shalom, stay safe. I want to keep you on the phone and work this through with you, because it really makes a lot of sense. Because
Sure.
as it turns out, the ideas in paganism make sense. They really, it's understandable why people would find these very attractive. It's just not true. It's not of God. If you believed that God was so great that he's inaccessible and you can't go directly to him because he's running the planets and he's perfect, you're so dirty, you are so sinful, God can't look at you. So there has to be somebody that bridges the two. There has to be somewhere between God and man. And Paul expresses that in 1 Timothy 2:5, for there is one God, and then one mediator between God and man. That's the man Jesus Christ. Well, that idea is utterly opposed by the Jewish scriptures. But could you understand, Holly? Oh, you've been to church. You know this. You know that's what they preach. You're a sinner, and God's perfect. He can't look at you. Right?
Right.
So in the pagan world, everybody believed there was God. In the ancient world, they used the term atheist in the ancient world, but they didn't mean what we mean. Everyone really believed in God. Now, what that term meant in the ancient world is not germane, but just really everyone believed in God. But they thought that God was way up there. He's like perfect. But me, I'm a sinner. I can't go to the creator of heaven and earth. In fact, the Greeks, the Greco-Roman world, people didn't pray to Zeus or Jupiter. You would have state affairs where there were celebrations and offerings brought to the great gods. But they didn't have time for you. The Torah is there to tell us that you can do it, that Hashem loves you very, very much, and that you could talk to him. And all of that, he'll listen to you. Moreover, if you repent, God promises he'll forgive you. And if you think you're unforgivable, God says, no, my ways are higher than your ways. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so too are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Isaiah 55, verse 6, 7, 8, and 9. So the message of the prophets was one that appealed to your higher state. And it was, in a sense, people go, but really? I think God really hates me. I mean, who's our biggest critic? Look in the mirror. We complain when people criticize us or say bad things about us. Mostly don't like it because, in a way, we're afraid that these criticisms really are true, that we really aren't good people. That's why the most painful experiences of our past are not physical wounds, but emotional wounds and words, not not guns and knives. And those words are particularly painful because we fear that they may be right. That's why people abhor criticism and are affected by criticism much more than they enjoy compliments. Someone can give you 100 compliments, and yeah, thank you. One criticism, that's all you think about, all the compliments in the garbage can. So understand that in the pagan world, the idea that God was not directly accessible was widespread. There was the intimacy that you can, you are children of the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 14, verse 1. That was unknown. So just like that's like on a pack of cigarettes, it says danger, smoking will kill you. The reason why everywhere in a package of cigarettes there's a warning that'll kill you is because at first when people start smoking, they enjoy it very, very much. And they can't see why it's harmful. So you have to have a message. This will kill you. Don't tell me that cigarette smoking relaxes you and all that stuff. It's killing you. And that's what the Torah is there to tell you. I know you think intuitively that there's no way God would be interested in you or could possibly pay attention to you or would want to pay attention to you. So the Navi is there to tell you, guess what? He's infinite in his mercy. And he sees you. And at the same time, there's a young woman right now in Bangkok who's laying on the floor crying because her husband, who she's been quarantined with, has just beat her. And he's listening to her too. So that's where the idea of a mediator. Now, it does not. Now, what Christians would submit is, well, didn't we have a priesthood? I'm a priest, but we're not mediators in a sense between God and man where we have to go through a priest. A priest is, it was identified as being unique and special because they are able to carry out certain rituals, which other people are not. And therefore, it's a clan of people, a family, a dynasty of people who are carrying out bringing offerings on behalf of the people, lighting the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, being judges among the Jewish people, but no one prays to priests. But because there's a language issue, Christianity and other religions could exploit that. But it's really only not the same. The prophets warned us, be very careful about this issue. I'm here, I'm listening. I really love you and care about you. Rome didn't convert to Christianity. Christianity converted to Rome. It succeeded because it adopted the ideas that were widespread in the world around them. That's why Roman Catholicism is celebrated strikingly different in New York City at St. Patrick's Cathedral at Rockefeller Center versus go to Sao Paulo and see the way Catholics, the rituals they engage in, and in Mexico and how they do. Well, it's really different. Why? Because in Mexico, the Roman Catholics inculcated these pagan ideas that existed in that region, in the Central and South America. So that's why it's practiced that way.
Wow.
And that's why Roman Catholicism is expressed so differently. There's your answer.
Okay. Thank you so much. Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just really quick. In my years as a Christian, I never had that Jesus moment, everyone talks about. I didn't have a testimony. Something just always felt off, and I found out that I do have some Jewish blood, so I'm really excited about that. But anyway, thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
Awesome. Very cool. Okay, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon, Holly. Bye-bye. All right. I don't think we have any more calls on yet, but there sure have been a lot that we missed this morning on my end, so it's okay. So the guys, the phone line's still open. Probably got time for one more question, maybe. Rabbi, how you doing on time?
I'm okay. We have, a few minutes and I have to run, but we have a few moments left.
Okay, so we'll give...
Holly's question was really very thoughtful, very, very thoughtful, and it really goes to the center of everything. That's why I just want to point this out. That's why if you listen to the testimonials of people who become Christians and those who become religious Jews, Noahide, same thing, they it's so different. You know, the typical testimony of becoming Christian is being just in the darkest place. I was drunk, I was lost, I gave up, I was high, I was low, that's really the story of, if you listen to tell me your testimony, that's it. I was low and then I got high. You listen to them, I hated God, I was anti-religious. And then, but if you listen to the testimonial of people who've embraced Judaism as their faith, why did you convert to Judaism? Why did you embrace Judaism as a non-Jew, called a Noahide? So there you go. I was studying, and were you on drugs? No, not at all. It's totally different. It's like, no, I was really, you don't know me, Rabbi. I was not just a Christian. I was a Bible-thumping Southern Baptist. I was way there. Let me tell you, I've had a lot of pastors, a lot of pastors' kids who've studied with me over nearly 40 years. That's where they come from. In fact, where they don't come from is they don't generally come from, Episcopalians and so on. They come from the most conservative, the most knowledgeable Christians. Because I was studying and I began to see that there are problems, and I began to see the beauty of the Torah and the beauty of the mitzvot, and that's what drew me in. So just the testimony of the person who embraces Christianity, and lahavdil, the testimony of someone who embraces the Jewish faith, is not just different, it's dramatically different. Because if you feel like you're hopeless and lost and dead and nothing can save you, then you need Jesus. You need something to do what you can't do. And if you are created in the image of God and you can do it, and God didn't lie in Genesis 4, verse 6 and 7, and he didn't lie in Deuteronomy 30, verse 14 through 17, you really can do it. Well, then Judaism, you're going to embrace the Jewish faith immediately. So those are great questions, and I love Holly's question. It's a great show.
Very good, very good. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up then, because look, there's not any more calls coming in, and we will let you go on about your night. Or it's late afternoon. I'm not used to you not being in Indonesia right now. Still, it's nice to know that you're in Israel.
There, it's 4 hours later.
That's nice. That's nice. Okay. All right, Rabbi. Well, again, thanks for your time. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in, of course. And
stay safe. Stay in touch, William.
Yes.
And add one other announcement. For those of you if you have a question about a certain issue, do go to YouTube. Do type in the issue, my name and the issue, and you'll almost certainly see a video on it. And you could study that. So just so you know,
certainly. Right.
You could study these things on YouTube. I don't know if there's 700 videos or 800, whatever the number is, but there's almost any topic. It's been covered over the years.
Right.
So bless you. Stay safe, William.
Very good. Thank you, Rabbi. You as well. Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Hashem willing. Take care, everybody. Peace.
חשוב